Welcome back, everyone. We all get stuck in our heads sometimes, right? Just caught in that loop of rehashing and worrying about stuff,
Yeah.
like overthinking.
Oh, for sure. Seems like that's just part of being human almost.
Feels that way sometimes. That's why I'm so curious about all the stuff you sent in for this deep dive. Like, we've got a therapist's YouTube video and a blog post, too, an article from that Headspace app,
Mm.
even relationship advice, and this Reddit thread, which is so relatable, where people are sharing how they overthink and what they try to do about it.
Yeah, a real mix of stuff, huh? Which I guess just shows you how common this whole overthinking thing is. Pops up everywhere, doesn't it?
Exactly. So that's what we're going to dig into today, not just like sum it all up, though.
Right.
We want to get to those like aha
Yeah.
moments,
Yeah.
those things you can actually use to get yourself OT of the overthinking trap.
Yeah, the goal is to understand it, sure,
Yeah.
but also give you some tools to actually change those thought patterns?
Love that. Okay, so the therapist in that YouTube video, she starts with this story, and I bet a lot of us have been there,
Ah.
getting called into her boss's office.
Oh boy, here we go.
And her mind just goes crazy with, like, what ifs?
Classic overthinking setup, right? Imagining the worst, getting all stressed, and then you're just anxious for days before anything even happens.
Totally. And she's in this state for like 2 days, barely sleeping, even asking coworkers if they know anything, thinking she's about to get fired.
Ooh, so what was it?
This is promotion. Big raise, new responsibilities, the whole deal. All that worry for absolutely nothing.
Which brings us to what a bunch of these sources say. Overthinking almost never solves the problem, and usually it makes things seem way worse in our heads.
It's like we invent drama for no reason. That Headspace article,
Yeah.
they call it catastrophizing, jumping to the worst conclusion, basically.
Yep, and they also talk about how uncertainty just feeds that overthinking beast. If we don't know what's going to happen, our minds try to fill in the blanks, and, well, they don't always do a great job, do they?
We're like programmed to look for danger, even when there isn't any, huh?
Which leads to the next big thing. Gotta spot your own overthinking patterns. That therapist on YouTube, she calls it noticing your triggers.
Okay, so what's a trigger in this sense? What are we looking for?
Everyone's got different ones, but it's about figuring out when and where you're most likely to get stuck in those thought loops. Is it a certain time of day, certain place, certain situations, the usual?
Oh, I definitely have those. For me, it's bedtime. Head hits the pillow, and suddenly I'm replaying every awkward conversation I've ever had.
Oh, yeah, that's a popular one. And if you read that Reddit thread, it's full of folks saying the same thing. Commute, being alone, all sorts of stuff. The point is, once you see the pattern, you can kind of be ready for it, maybe even head it off.
Makes sense. Like, all right, brain, I know you like to do this here, so I'm not going to fall for it this time.
Yeah.
But why does it happen in the first place?
Hmm.
Why do our brains seem to love overthinking?
Well, that Headspace article, they explain it by how our brains are wired, literally. Think of it like this. There's the part that's always thinking, trying to make sense of stuff.
Right.
But then you've got the fear center, like a security guard, always looking out for danger.
Okay, I'm with you so far.
So when something uncertain pops up or something that feels like a threat, that fear center goes into overdrive. And basically, it kind of hijacks the thinking part.
So all the rational stuff gets drowned out by anxiety, is that it?
Pretty much. And that's why it's so hard to think clearly when you're in that overthinking spiral. Emotions are in control.
Which explains why those just don't think about it tips never work, huh? Saw a lot of those in the Reddit thread, by the way.
Oh, yeah, it's like trying to stop a wave with your bare hands. Ain't gonna happen.
So if ignoring doesn't work, what does? What are some things we can actually do to break out of that cycle?
Well, the good news is, across all these sources, there are some pretty clear themes, techniques that keep popping up, and a lot of them are more doable than you might think.
All right, that's encouraging. Hit me with some solutions then. What's the first one?
Okay, one that both Headspace and these psyche guides recommend is scheduled worry time. You ever tried that?
I haven't, but it sounds interesting. What's that all about?
Basically, you pick a specific time each day to just deal with your worries. So instead of letting them pop up randomly, you contain them to this little worry window.
Huh. So it's like saying to your anxiety, all right, you get 30 minutes, then you're done.
Exactly. Putting some boundaries around it instead of letting it run wild.
I like that. Feels more proactive than just trying to ignore it. And speaking of proactive, a lot of these sources talk about mindfulness and meditation for overthinking.
Oh, definitely. Headspace, of course, has tons of guided meditations and stuff. But even on Reddit, people were saying just simple breathing exercises or paying attention to the moment, That helped calm things down.
Like hitting the pause button on that mental hamster wheel.
Yep, that's the idea. And it doesn't have to be complicated either. Just a few minutes focusing on your breath can make a big difference.
All right, so scheduling worry time, practicing mindfulness. Two good starting points. What else did these sources have to say?
Well, there's another technique that's pretty powerful, very well. Mind and a few others talk about it. It's called thought challenging.
Thought challenging.
Yeah.
Okay, how do you challenge a thought? Exactly.
It's all about questioning those negative or anxious thoughts, looking for proof. Do they hold up? Often, when we're overthinking, our thoughts are kind of distorted, blown out of proportion.
Like that catastrophizing thing we talked about.
Exactly. So thought challenging is taking a step back and saying, hold on, is this really true? What's the evidence for and against it? It's about replacing those unhelpful thoughts with ones that are more realistic, balanced.
Sounds like training your brain to be less reactive, more objective, huh?
You got it. Takes practice, but it can be really effective for reducing overthinking.
Okay, this is making a lot of sense. So we've got scheduled worry time, mindfulness, and thought challenging. Any other strategies that jumped out at you from all this stuff?
Oh yeah, there's plenty more where that came from. There are even some techniques that fall under like cognitive diffusion, which I think you'll find interesting.
Cognitive diffusion. All right, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about that.
So cognitive diffusion, it's about like putting some distance between you and your thoughts, not fighting them or trying to make them go away.
Right, because we learned that usually backfires.
Exactly. It's more about just noticing them without judging, like they're clouds passing by.
Oh, I like that. So you're not getting all tangled up in the thought itself. You're just observing it.
Yeah, and the therapist in the YouTube video, she talks about this observer self exercise. You picture yourself sitting in a movie theater, watching your thoughts up on the screen.
So you're not the thoughts, you're the audience.
Exactly. And that can be super powerful. You start to realize, hey, I don't have to be controlled by these things. I can choose whether to engage or not.
It's like you're taking back control of your own mind, huh?
Totally. And that can be really empowering. It helps you shift from feeling like a victim to being the one in charge, right?
Yeah, I can see how that would be a game changer for people who overthink a lot. Any other cognitive diffusion techniques that stood out to you?
Well, the blog post mentions labeling your thoughts. So instead of saying, I'm so stressed about this presentation, you'd say, I'm having the thought that I'm stressed about this presentation.
Oh, so you're acknowledging it, but not getting swept away by it.
Yeah. Separating yourself from the emotion, just observing it.
That's smart. I could see how that would be useful when you feel yourself about to spiral.
It's another way to kind of interrupt that automatic reaction and choose a more mindful response.
These are really interesting techniques. We're getting deep here.
We are, but it's important to remember, all these strategies are great, but sometimes overthinking can be a sign of something more serious. Both Very Well Mind and Good Arcs mention this.
Like, it could be related to some other mental health thing going on.
Right. If it's messing with your daily life, relationships, work, or if you've got other symptoms like being down all the time, really anxious, changes in how you sleep or eat, then it's probably time to talk to a professional.
And they make a good point about therapy being normal. It's not a weakness. It's actually taking care of yourself.
Totally. And there are specific types of therapy that are good for overthinking, like CBT. That's cognitive behavioral therapy. It helps you identify and then actually change those negative thought patterns.
So it's like having an expert guide to help you navigate all that stuff in your head.
Pretty much, yeah. And then there's ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy. That's more about accepting your thoughts and feelings without judging them, and then taking action based on your values, what's important to you.
That sounds really empowering, actually. Like saying, okay, these thoughts are here, but they don't run the show. I get to choose what I focus on.
Exactly. And there's also metacognitive therapy.
Yeah.
It helps you understand and change how you think, like thinking about thinking.
Wow, so many options. It's like we're building a whole toolkit for our minds. We've got scheduling, worry time, mindfulness, challenging thoughts, those cognitive diffusion things, and even getting professional help if we need it.
I think that's a great way to look at it. It's not just about learning about overthinking. It's about having the resources to actually do something about it.
Okay, you mentioned there are even more strategies out there.
Right.
What else did you find in all these sources that really resonated with you?
You know, one that's often overlooked but is super powerful is journaling.
Oh, I love journaling. It's like having a conversation with yourself, but on paper.
Exactly. And it can be so helpful for processing all those thoughts that are swirling around. You can write about what's bugging you, explore different ways of looking at things, even challenge those negative thoughts.
Gets it out of your head and onto the page where it can't cause as much trouble, huh?
Right. And what's great is anyone can do it. No special equipment. Just grab a notebook and pen, or even use your phone.
And you can do it anytime, anywhere, like a portable therapy session.
It really is. And it can be such a good tool for understanding yourself better and growing.
Speaking of growth, another thing that kept popping up was self-compassion.
Oh, that's a big one. It's so easy to get down on yourself when you're overthinking, feeling like you should be able to stop it or something.
Yeah, like, why can't I just shut this off? Or everyone else seems to have it figured out.
Right. But it's so important to remember. Overthinking is totally normal. Doesn't mean you're weak or messed up. It's just our brains doing what they do, thinking.
And sometimes thinking a little too much. But the point is, we don't have to beat ourselves up about it.
Exactly. Instead of judging ourselves, we can try self-compassion. Acknowledge those thoughts and feelings, but with kindness and understanding.
That's such an important shift, isn't it? Because I think a lot of overthinking comes from that self-criticism, feeling like we're not good enough.
For sure. And when we can replace that judgment with self-compassion, it creates a much better environment for us. More supportive,
Yeah.
nurturing.
Yeah, and that makes it easier to let go of the negative stuff and focus on what's good, what's empowering.
Speaking of positive, did you notice how many of these sources talked about gratitude?
Oh yeah, it was like everywhere. Like gratitude is the cure-all for negativity.
It really does seem that way. And it makes sense, right? When you're focused on what you're grateful for, it's harder to get stuck in the bad stuff.
It's like shifting your focus to something brighter. And there's science behind it too. Studies show that practicing gratitude can actually change your brain, make it more positive and resilient.
That's why so many sources say to keep a gratitude journal or just spend a few minutes each day thinking about what you're thankful for.
Such a simple thing, but it can make such a difference for how you feel, huh?
Totally. And it's not just about feeling good either. Gratitude can help with stress, sleep, your overall mood.
It's like a natural mood booster. And the best part is, it's free.
It reminds us that we have more control over our own happiness than we think sometimes.
Thinking about all these strategies, it's not like you have to pick just one, right?
That's a good point. It's more about finding what works for you, creating your own mix of techniques.
Yeah, like a recipe for feeling good.
And just like cooking, you might have to experiment a bit to find the right combination, the right amounts.
So it's about finding that sweet spot, the things that help you feel grounded, less caught up in those overthinking loops.
And that sweet spot might change depending on what's going on in your life, what you're dealing with at the time.
Right, it's not one size fits all.
Mhm.
It's about being flexible, figuring out what works best for you in each moment.
And that leads us to another important thing that came up a few times, the idea of acceptance.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. It feels like acceptance is at the core of a lot of these mindfulness practices.
It really is. And when it comes to overthinking, acceptance can be a powerful tool.
Because sometimes it feels like the harder you try to stop it, the worse it gets.
Like that saying, what you resist persists.
Exactly. The more you fight it, the stronger it becomes.
So instead of trying to push those thoughts away, what if we tried to be curious about them, accept them?
Okay, I'm listening. How do you accept a thought that's making you anxious?
It starts by just acknowledging it's there without beating yourself up about it. It's like saying, okay, I'm having this thought. I see it. I accept it.
Like you're taking the power away from it.
Exactly. And then instead of getting lost in what the thought is saying, you gently bring your attention back to right now.
What you can see, hear, feel, all that.
Yeah, grounding yourself in the present moment instead of getting lost in all the what ifs and should haves.
It's like stepping out of that thought loop and focusing on what's actually happening.
And that can be a really powerful shift. It helps you regain control, move forward with more clarity and purpose.
I really like this whole acceptance thing. It seems like it connects to so many of the other strategies. Like with self-compassion, you're accepting yourself, flaws and all. With mindfulness, you're accepting the present moment. And with cognitive diffusion, you're accepting your thoughts without letting them control you.
You're making connections. I like it. It's not about keeping these strategies separate. It's about weaving them all together.
Yeah, like creating your own little mental wellness tapestry.
Exactly. And it's a tapestry you can keep adding to, keep refining.
Right. It's a journey, not a destination. But speaking of journeys, I think we're getting close to the end of our overthinking deep dive. Any final thoughts you want to share?
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today, and I hope everyone listening feels like they can actually do something about overthinking. But if I had to leave you with one thing, it would be patient with yourself.
Oh, that's so important.
Overcoming overthinking. It's a process. It takes time and it takes effort. You're going to have setbacks, but don't let that get you down.
It's like learning any new skill, right? Practice, practice,
Mhm.
practice. And some days it feels like you're not getting anywhere.
Exactly. But you got to keep at it, keep trying those techniques, and keep believing that you can change.
And celebrate the small wins along the way.
For sure, every time you catch yourself overthinking and you choose a different response, that's a win. Every time you're kind to yourself instead of critical, that's a win. Every step towards a more peaceful life, that's a win.
That's so encouraging, and I think it's the perfect way to wrap things up. But before we go, let's quickly recap those key takeaways so everyone has a clear plan for taming that overthinking mind.
Let's do it.
Okay, so first and foremost, we talked about awareness.
Yeah, knowing your patterns, what triggers you, how overthinking is affecting you.
Right. And then we went through a bunch of techniques for actually managing it.
Everything from scheduling worry time to mindfulness, thought challenging, cognitive diffusion, journaling, even getting professional help if that's what you need.
And we talked about how it's all about finding what works for you.
Experimenting, being patient with yourself, practicing self-compassion, all of that good stuff.
And finally, that power of acceptance.
Accepting ourselves, our thoughts, this moment, without judgment.
And using that acceptance to build a happier life.
It's about recognizing we have the power to choose how we react to our thoughts. We don't have to be defined by them.
I love that. So there you have it, folks, your complete guide to stopping overthinking, all from these really interesting sources. I hope you found this deep dive helpful and maybe even inspiring.
Me too. And remember, you can change your thoughts. And when you do that, you can change your whole life.
That's a great way to put it. All right, we'll see you next time for another deep dive into, well, all the interesting stuff about being human. Until then, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep believing in yourself. It's kind of wild, right? Like, we got all these specific tips, but then there's this whole other side of it about knowing yourself and being okay with things.
Yeah, it all kind of ties together, doesn't it? And I think that's why this topic is so interesting. It's not just about solving a problem. It's about, like, figuring out how our minds work.
Totally. And one thing that keeps coming back to me is overthinking is often about being scared of what we don't know. Like, we're trying to think our way out of uncertainty, but that just makes us more anxious, usually.
That illusion of control thing again, right? We think if we can just plan for every possibility, we'll be fine. But life doesn't really work like that.
So what do we do about that? How do you get comfortable with not knowing?
Yeah.
Because that seems like a big part of this whole thing.
Well, a few of these sources talked about that. It's about learning to be okay with uncertainty instead of fighting it.
Okay, that sounds good, but ICW.
The Psyche Guides article, they had this idea called detached mindfulness. Ever heard of that?
I don't think so. What's that about?
It's about observing your thoughts and feelings, but without judging them or getting attached to them. So instead of getting caught up in, like, what if this happens or why did that happen, you just notice it and let it go.
Like watching clouds, right?
Yeah.
You see them, but you don't try to hold on to them.
Exactly. Detached mindfulness is about realizing that those thoughts and feelings, they come and go.
We don't have to get swept away.
Right. Just observe them, let them pass, and don't let them run your life.
Kind of like those thought diffusion techniques, right?
Oh, totally. It's all about creating space between why you and your thoughts. Remembering that thoughts are just thoughts. They're not always true, and they don't have to control you.
It's pretty amazing to realize that we get to choose how we react to our thoughts.
Yeah.
We don't have to be, like, victims of our own minds.
And a great way to do that is to focus on right now. So much overthinking is about the past or the future.
Yeah, regrets, worries, stuff that's already happened or might not even happen.
Exactly. Mindfulness is all about bringing your attention back to this moment, what you can see, hear, smell, taste, touch right now.
Grounding yourself in the present instead of getting lost in your head.
And when you do that, you'll often find that those anxious thoughts quiet down because you're not feeding them with attention anymore.
Like cutting off their power supply.
And in that quiet space, that's where you can find peace and clarity.
And with that clarity, you can make better decisions, take actions that are actually in line with what you care about.
You know, I noticed a lot of people on that Reddit thread were saying exercise helps them with overthinking.
Well, that makes sense. Getting out of your head into your body.
It's a big shift. Whether it's running, dancing, yoga, even just walking. Moving your body can release all that tension that builds up when you overthink.
It's like a reset button for your whole system.
And it reminds us that we're not just minds, right? We're bodies too. And when the body feels good, the mind usually follows.
As we wrap this up, I keep coming back to that self-compassion thing. It just seems so important.
It really is. Because it's so easy to be hard on yourself when you're stuck in those thought loops. Like you feel like you're failing or something's wrong with you.
For sure. But everything we read and watched today, they all said overthinking is normal. It doesn't mean you're broken or not good enough.
Just means you're human. We've got these brains that are made to think, and sometimes they just think a little too much.
Instead of beating ourselves up about it, we can try to be kind to ourselves, understand why it's happening.
And that can change everything. You start looking at overthinking with curiosity, not judgment.
Yeah, like it's an opportunity to learn about yourself, not a sign that you're weak.
Exactly. And when you start being kind to yourself, it creates a safer space inside where you can try these techniques and see what works for you.
So it's not just about stopping overthinking. It's about having a better relationship with your own mind, right?
Beautifully put. I think that's a great way to end this.
To everyone out there who overthinks, you're not alone. And you can change how you relate to those thoughts. It takes time and effort, and you got to be kind to yourself.
Oh.
But it is possible.
Remember, it starts with one small step. So be patient, keep practicing, and don't give up.
And never stop learning and growing. We'll be back next time for another deep dive into, well, being human. Until then, take care.